Okay, so let me just put it to you this way. If you open the dictionary and you look up the word hustle, you might see his face first and then see my face next.
I'm John Henry. At 18, I started my first company, and within 2 years, I successfully sold that company.
What I prayed for, I said, please give me all the problems that come with having this thing.
Hello, everybody. I'm Silva Harapetian, and thank you for joining us for another conversation. With me today is John Henry, and I am so excited about talking to him in this conversation because he is just a wealth of knowledge, even though he's super young.
I'm John Henry. At 18, I started my first company, and within 2 years, I successfully sold that company.
But that has nothing to do with it. Age has nothing to do with wisdom. It's all about experience, and that I think is part of his story. Now, if you don't know John Henry, and if you're not following him on social media, I suggest you do, because the content that he creates is really impactful and helpful to life and business and entrepreneurship. This man started a business at the age of 18 and sold it at the age of 24. And since then, he has... Okay, so let me just put it to you this way. If you open the dictionary and you look up the word hustle, you might see his face first and then see my face next.
No matter what business you're in, if you want to succeed, it all comes down to the hustle.
So I feel like we have a kinship based on the fact that hustle is our middle name. I'm going to continue to introduce him throughout this conversation and talk about some of his accomplishments, but I want to jump right into talking to him. One of the first things that I want to talk about is how important being an immigrant is to the factor of a new level of hustle that you and I know and understand. So thank you for joining us, and talk to us a little bit about that mindset that seems to be instilled in us and run in our veins, whether we like it or not.
I love it. No, thank you for having me. It's really a great honor. I've been looking forward to connecting with you for a little while. So what better time than now? So yeah, no, you nailed it on the head. I mean, being an immigrant, or a first generation born immigrant, is just so crucial and formative to my DNA. And when I did a little bit of research on this, because I did a podcast episode with eBay focused around immigrant entrepreneurship and like what the correlation is. And a healthy percentage of Fortune 500 companies are started by immigrant CEOs, including, founder of eBay, Pierre Omidyar, who's from Iran, and, Jobs, who hails from Syrian parents, and, just runs the gamut. So I think what it is you come here and you just don't take the opportunity for granted. And not that American citizens do, because I think that the American spirit is alive and healthy in terms of like wanting to be prosperous and upwardly mobile. But I do think that when you come from elsewhere in, you are acutely aware of the situation outside of the States and how, there isn't necessarily an equal playing ground. And then if we were to zoom into America, obviously we're going through, severe racial tensions. And, I think in a lot of ways, for sure, there are systemic disadvantages for communities of color. And so, being an immigrant and then coming in here, you have to deal with those realities. But even still, right? Like I remember I used to protest the flag when I was in school. My mom damn near slapped me. And she was like, John, if you only knew that I had to walk 7 miles just to get to school and back every day.
Right.
Like, you might feel like you have it bad here, and, that's not to take away from anyone's pain, but relatively outside of the States in so many places, it's so extreme. And it's such a rare instance in which someone could go from rags to riches. And that when you get here, you can taste it, you can feel it, it's palpable, and you want to get after it, even though you'll have to face more barriers than, say, your white male counterparts. It still is attainable. And I can say fairly confidently that, I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had in front of me had I not been blessed with, just immigrant parents instilling that DNA into me, and then being in a playground, so to speak, where you can really put that to the test, and the limit is really the reciprocal amount of your effort.
Yeah.
And so it's been amazing. It's been amazing, and I think it's a really big part of why a lot of immigrants can lock in and succeed.
Yeah, I love that because I also believe that we have different context and different
Mm-hmm.
perspective to life, and we have been either personally or through stories, and our parents have also almost lived through the difficulties that they have, right?
Mm,
The not having even the opportunity. So we tend to also somewhat overcompensate because we know we're behind the eight ball.
mm,
And in
mhm,
doing so, not having the resources that most people do. I know when I was in high school and I came to this country when I was 14. So I got to high school and didn't even speak any English. So
mm,
knowing how far behind I was, and that the fact that I was not going to have the same opportunities as everyone else, not even to my other immigrant counterparts, you look at your own parents and you see how resourceful they were and they've been in order to survive, and that
mhm.
resourcefulness sort of also applies to you. So my next question is, I get this question all the time, which is, well, how did you do that? Like, how did you
Right.
how did you have the money, or how did you know so and so, and how did you make that happen? How did you? And I always
Mm,
come back to resourcefulness. You have to
mm.
think outside the box. Talk
That
to
was
me
the
a
first
little.
word that came to mind, actually, was
Yeah,
when you
talk to
said,
me a
"How'd you
little
do
bit
that?"
about that.
Hmm. And it's, I think people overestimate the amount of resources you need to make something happen.
Mm,
It's oftentimes, when I speak to folks and, they're on the ground floor and they're looking to start, they'll place all kinds of um, things in front of them. These are self-prescribed things that they feel they need. And so, because the prospect is so daunting of getting started, so then you say, well, surely it must take money, surely it must take this, surely. And, people don't even realize that these are all constructs of your mind that you place in front of you.
right.
And so here I am, I just sidestepped all that, and I realized, like, at first I was paralyzed by that as well. I was like, damn, you need this, like, there's no way. And for me, it took meeting someone who came from where I come from, that
Mm,
did it and showed me, bruh, all you need is a little bit of creativity, a little bit of hustle, a little bit of shaking and jiving, and you can get in position. And so that's why I'm really big on that's why I produce content, because you can't be what you can't see.
oh,
And
that's
so
so good. You can't be what you can't see. Ooh, that's so good. Was this
that,
when you were working as a doorman in New York?
for sure, was
Okay.
working as a doorman, and I was exposed to this wealth, but it just never felt like it was for me because I wasn't seeing anyone who came from my background. And so what happens is when you see people outside of your background that are successful, at least I did, I fell into this trap of just justifying it. Like, well, they got a degree from here. Well, you find all the reasons why it can't be you until you finally meet someone who comes from where you come from your circumstances, or worse off, and makes it, and then you say, and then it hits you that you really have no excuse. And so that is why I produce content. Like, it's expensive to produce content, as much as I do, and blah blah blah. But, like, for me, it's been really critical for me to show kids, hey, I dropped out of school my first semester. I didn't do college. I come from a family that grew up below the poverty line. We inherited every kind of bad financial habit you can think of, and yet still you're able to break through, and that's because it doesn't take as much as you think. So I guess that's my answer in an abstract way, but in a concrete way, what I would say is you got to find something to lock in on. And that's
Mm,
really the beginning of how my journey and other journeys begin to take off. You got to find something that you can lock into and start. It serves as the vehicle by which you improve your own self and your habits. And it's less about making money in the beginning.
hmm.
It's more about the person you become as you seek to perfect this craft.
Right. On that note, what I do want to talk about is you made a really great point in locking in on something, but that
Mm,
could also be dangerous because if you have perfectionist paralysis,
Mm-hmm.
then you tell yourself, well, I don't know what I want to do. And before you know it, you've spent 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 9 months, a year, 10 years, and trying to figure out what that perfect thing is supposed to be. And people ask me all the time, how did you do this, or how did you accomplish this, and how did you start? And I just always tell them, just start something,
Yeah,
just begin.
yeah, I agree with that. And what I didn't say was find the perfect thing to lock into. What I just said was find a thing to lock into. And
Love that. Love that.
it can be scary because you never know if you're choosing the right thing, if you're wasting your time, if you're barking up the wrong tree. But, for me, it's more about, in the ground stages of getting your, career going and what have you, you got to hone skills. And you don't hone skills reading about stuff. You just don't. So for me, the perfect starting place, in my opinion, is not necessarily finding the perfect thing to start on. It's just finding something that captures your imagination, that gets you excited, and that you feel like you could contribute to this thing because it's kind of naturally playing off some of your strengths. And you don't have to. In fact, I think if you worry about, monetizing it to start, I think it can suffocate the seed of the thing that you're looking to grow.
Mm.
Because then you think it's got to be a business, and then you're thinking about formations and all this other stuff. But in reality, you know, it's about just like the person you become when you nurture a vision that you have in your mind. Like, let me see what happens when, I make this a little bit cooler, or, and then you just tweak it. And so that is the groundwork of you developing your skill, you're honing your perspective. And before you know it, just you, having contributed yourself to this thing, it gets to the point where someone says, damn, you're pretty good at that. Hey, have you ever considered doing
Right.
this? Or, I'd love to pay you to do it. And before you know it, you're on your way to increasing your earning power, which has been absolutely crucial, to my career. And it's what helped me kind of break out of, you know, being locked into what someone else says my time is worth versus locking in on a skill or a vehicle or a craft or whatever. And you hone it. You spend some time being unpaid for it. So you got to find a way to make it work in that meantime, whether it's your job's holding you down, whether you take a step back and you live more frugally, um, or whether you work damn near free, if not completely, but find some way to make it work so that you can hone your craft. And if you can lock in for 12 to 18 months, I promise you, your next 12 to 18 months will have a substantially increased quality of life. And that's what people aren't willing to do. They're not willing to lock in for a year to 2 years. I didn't say 2 years. In my opinion, I think it's more like 2 years. I just didn't want to scare anyone listening. But in my experience, every time I've locked in for 2 years, the next 2 years I've lived on a different level.
Yeah.
And
So much of this game is mindset, right? So much
mm-hmm,
of this hustle, so much of entrepreneurship, so much of making it whatever that means for you, whether it's monetary or lifestyle or time, whatever it means, is mindset. And it
mm-hmm,
is about taking a step back. Sometimes you are required to downsize,
mm-hmm.
and it is so difficult for
Humbling. Yeah.
it is humbling, and it's difficult for a society like ours where social media is so it has so much influence and so much control that
Sure.
people tend to lose the bigger picture and the
Mm-hmm,
big vision of what am I sacrificing for in this
mm-hmm.
next 18 months or 2 years in order to be somewhere
Exactly.
else. So vision, mindset, which comes back to what you said, the importance of surrounding yourself with people who then understand and support that. So talk to me a little bit about that, because coming from an immigrant family, an immigrant community, I know that in my journey, in my vision, in my path, people didn't just look at me sideways. People, I mean, were brutal in the
Uh,
process.
I
Talk
already knew
to
you
me
were
about
going with
that.
it for sure. And that's the thing. So look, our parents they do and did the best they could with what they got. And, you know, I understand their pressures. Like you move here and, you want your kids to have the next step up from what they
Mm-hmm.
had, which usually means, hey, anything that has any degree of uncertainty, you know, you don't want that for your kids because you just don't want them to go through that pain. And so you coerce them to want to go down these, really fixed paths. And so along with that, to your point, does come a mindset, unfortunately, of scarcity. Like, hey, listen, you don't want to, you can't trust people, this and that, and all this kind of stuff. And hey, you got to play it safe. And so I didn't realize until I got started on this how much of that I absorbed and how much of that I was programmed into believing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it got to the point where anytime you're kind of breaking out and you're starting to get a little bit of traction in your craft, your own program beliefs of what you believe is possible for you, you know, auto correct your upward your
Yeah.
transcendence into like more like what's normal for you. And so,
It suppresses the
you
risk that you're willing to take.
for sure.
Yeah.
And you brought up a great point around, hey, well, surround yourself with positive people. I would go as far as to say I would surround myself with no people, and that's far better than surrounding yourself with people that reinforce that negative mindset, even if it means it's your family. And that's the painful part. For instance, I can remember when I started becoming really sensitive and aware around about the thoughts that I was thinking. This is the first time I really like was deciding I was going to lock in. I was really going to start this business, and I was auditing the thoughts that I was thinking all the time. And I started cutting things out, anything that didn't serve it. And I started realizing like the news was always on in my house, in my mom's house, and it was just like killing, raping. And I was like, let me cut that out.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the music that I was listening to was not serving my purpose. So how far are you willing to go to lock in on your craft and get a better life for yourself? So that music that I love, there was a time I just had to cut it out. And yet these thoughts were persisting, and I realized, oh my gosh, it's my own family that is constantly saying, hey, it's just the constant bickering and the tone and the energy. And I was like, I was willing to pay the price of saying, you know what, guys, I got to go away for a little while
Right.
and go and rent a room in a dark, dingy apartment that, is certainly not as comfortable as my mom's crib with my
Right.
mom's cooking and all that stuff. But I was willing to go to the extreme length to isolate myself. And I'd rather be with no one to give myself the space to foster my own new paradigm that I was building. Because when it's new, when you're first building this new paradigm for yourself, it's fragile. And any negative influence is going to, destruct it easily.
Right.
And so I locked in. And once I emerged as more mature in my own thinking and my confidence as my new self, then I went and sought more positive reinforcement. And now I'm at the point where, I've got my family to come all the way around because now they look to me for, hey, show us how to do things.
Right.
So it's funny how it comes full circle, but not unless you're willing to pay the price.
Yeah, because uncertainty is what they've experienced, and I too am empathetic and compassionate to the journey. But a lot of immigrant families have been in survival mode for so long, and with the unrest and the movement that we're seeing, a lot of communities of color and minorities have been in the survival mode economically for so long that anytime you put yourself in a position where nothing is guaranteed, right? Every 2 weeks you're not getting a check and the job is not guaranteed. It tends to, I think, reactivate that deep-rooted trauma that they've experienced in life. And it's so
That's
important.
a great word, reactivate.
Yeah, and the reality is it's in you too, because you said you have your own programming, and the awareness of that makes a huge difference, and the ability to know that you have the power to change that is also something that I think we downplay and people don't understand and don't realize how much power they do have over their thoughts, over their environment. I always say, what are you willing to do to get what you want?
What you say you want.
Right. What are you willing to do? Are you willing to pay the cost? Everybody wants X, Y, and Z, but I paid a very specific price for that. Are you willing to do the same? So let's talk a little bit about your journey in in being in real estate, right? So you went from the dry cleaner, you sold your business at 24 and then
Mm-hmm.
went into Harlem Capital, correct? Was that your next move?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give you a sense of the chronology. So I started the business quite young. I sold the business at 21. Then I started an incubator in Harlem, which was really a fascinating project where I was helping businesses move into Harlem. It was a non-for-profit kind of project. And my first touch point really with real estate, beyond being a doorman, which is truly my first touch point, but my first real touch point was I had this non-for-profit incubator, and I had a big real estate dynasty family that said, well, you're doing something pretty interesting, and we own a lot of Harlem. Like, have you ever thought about doing what you're doing for these businesses, but crossing over to the for-profit side? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, we are a real estate family. And I said, well, I don't know anything about real estate. They said, John, we know real estate. They said, you just bring your same energy and help us, source real estate technology investments. And so that was completely new to me, but I took them up on it. And so for a year, I ran a fund for them. It was a small $8 million fund. And I invested in not physical real estate, but um, anything technology based that deals with real estate. So property management software, construction equipment rental software, zoning, and now. So I learned real estate really. I was blessed to learn it from a super high institutional level first,
Mm.
although I didn't touch physical real estate. But then a funny thing happened is, as much as I like the tech side, I'm driving all over the place with this family. And when we're driving down Fifth Avenue, it's not sightseeing that they're doing. It's like they're like, okay, they're checking up on their
They're
assets
checking on their
as we're,
properties.
yeah, they have 60,000 units in New York City.
Wow.
They are a very, very wealthy, four-generation deep real estate family. And, that really made a deep impact on me. And so when I finished my time there with them, for as much as, we wanted to continue that venture, I knew that I learned the most important thing that I learned had nothing to do with the job itself. The job itself was sourcing real estate tech, but working with them, I learned about generational wealth really at a really high level and how they had such reverence for their family name and their reputation that they took no shortcuts to because any ding on their reputation over the 100-year term was never worth what they would save in the short term.
Mm.
And so I learned this very noble type of way of thinking from them. And man, they told me a funny story. Like when the Forbes list first came out in the 1980s, the Forbes editor got two calls. They got one from this family saying, hey, you put us on there for too much. And they got one from the Trump family that said, hey, you put us on for too little. And that's a true story. So it's just funny how, this family is really in the elite tier. And it was just really cool to learn New York City through that. There's a lot of buildings in New York City named after them. So then that was the way that I learned it. And I respectfully needed to leave them and go uptown and build something with the pursuit of that generational wealth for us. And so that's when I started Harlem Capital. And, we took that journey and we were successful with it. We raised our inaugural fund was $40 million fund, which is great. It was the first time that a fund focused on investing in diversity in minorities received institutional backing. And, it just made a big splash. And just recently at the top of the year, I stepped down from HCP. It was a scary thing to do because, again, it's funny because being a risk taker, at some point, that risk that you took, if you're lucky, becomes a stable thing to do. And so at HCP, I spent half a decade building it, and then it became a sure thing because we raised a fund and we had the success in it, which is going to continue going. But I've been like this my whole life where once I kind of hit that point, I'm like, okay, I got to do something else now.
Okay,
And
so, I can't let you continue. The journalist in me, there was a lot of buzz about you stepping down. It was, you really pushed, you did such a great job and raised so much money. And then to see you just kind of step down, there was a lot of whispers. What happened? What happened? What happened? So everybody wants to know what happened.
Yeah. Well, it just, I felt like I contributed all I was meant to that project. And so here's what I mean. Um, I can give you like a nuanced look into it, right? So raising a fund that has institutional backing, it's
Hmm.
very different than any kind of and any other type of fund, because when you have, you know, endowments and state pensions and, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, like when you're getting very large $1 million checks, multi-million dollar checks from these institutions, it comes with a certain ethos that, you're expected to behave as a manager. And so I believe in radical responsibility. So I can take it upon myself and say that I don't think I was ready to become the kind of person that you need to become in order to manage institutional money, because that comes with things that are the exact opposite of how I am as a person. For instance, I like to be able to go on social media and say fuck the law if I want to, but
Right.
you can't do that
When you're
when you're in
managing
this.
an institutional fund.
No,
Right.
not at all.
So,
Not at all.
okay.
Everything gets checked, everything gets audited, like you got to button up,
Right.
like, and you're expected to stay completely away from the fray. And it's a much different type of existence.
Yeah, you have to
And so,
live within the boundaries of having that money.
well, and
It's,
exactly,
yeah.
and you got to do what's safe, because it's a responsible thing to do, because you've taken capital from these organizations that are in a lot of cases publicly traded and whatever. And so that capital heightens your power and your reach and your influence, but it comes with a certain type of, demeanor and way that you have to live as an individual,
Hmm.
that I tell you, that I wrestled with this decision, because, on one hand, it's like, damn, it's everything I ever worked for. Like, if I stay here, I will for sure get rich. Um, However, you know, I just felt like I built this. Like, I feel the most capable that I've ever felt in my life. Like, I was part of a team that, made history. I have deep network. I have resources. I have more. I have the experience of having done it. You know, I feel really emboldened and able to do a lot now. So I was at the crossroads, and I thought about it for several months, and I spoke about it openly with the team, and this was an ongoing discussion. It came out of nowhere to the public, but not for us internally.
Right.
And so, also, just to add an additional layer of transparency and honesty, the firm is gotten to a point where it was growing, and it was well beyond the four guys that started it. And now we have additional partners and board members and staff and interns, and like, it doesn't help the organization when everyone's abiding by a certain code, but then like you have this one partner that everyone just can't expect, like, yeah, that's just how John rolls. And so, like, it actually begins to taint the culture of the same thing that you are building.
Right.
And so I realized I was living a double standard. I was being hypocritical, because I setting out to build this firm, but I was not operating within the the way that you're expected to operate in this type of firm. So I stepped back, because I thought it was better for the firm long term. And then, practically, like, I still have my equity and stuff in the business, and I know that I have zero doubt that those guys are going to, and guys and gals are going to do really, really well. But now that gives me the space to say, okay, cool. So I've done that now.
I can
So
say
it's
whatever the
like,
heck I want on social media now. No, but no,
yeah.
on a serious note, this is a really great lesson, right? There's a really deep lesson in this story that you shared, which is something that if you've lived at all, if you've taken risk at all, if you've stepped out of your own comfort zone at all, you recognize, and we grapple with this all the time, is staying true and aligned to who you are first,
Mm,
over power, over greed, over money, over, because the you can't really get to your purpose if you find yourself no longer aligned with who you are.
mm. And I might add on top of that, there's nothing scarier than when you thought you did, like, to our earlier point about locking in, and then let's say it works, and then it gets to this height that you always envisioned it. Can you walk away from that if you then discover that that's not the perfect fit for you?
Right. It's no longer aligned. Right.
Right. So
Right.
can you walk away from that even after a half a decade or a decade of building something, and then you discover that you went through that just to come to grips with like, okay, this isn't the perfect thing for me anymore.
Right.
And so for me, one thing that I am deeply grateful to myself for always from the beginning of my journey till now is I've always had the bravery to do the more uncomfortable thing if
And
it
that is
felt right.
so powerful because it does separate there is a big gap between the people who are willing to actually take action and be brave and go into the unknown, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Versus people who are willing to stay in the comfort zone and do whatever it is that they do in order. It takes enormous, and I struggled with that same
Mm.
experience for a very long time because I was at a crossroad too. You know, I've spent 22 years in journalism
Mm-hmm.
doing news and coming to grips with whether this is still aligned with who I am and
Mm.
my bigger purpose,
Mm.
and um, having to essentially make peace with the fact that the 22 years you've invested in building this is not in vain. It has prepared you for this next thing that you're supposed to do. And
Exactly.
it's hard to
It's hard.
it's hard because it's not tangible. This
Mm-hmm.
next thing is also unknown. So it
Right.
takes enormous amount of courage and bravery and um, feeling empowered within yourself and knowing your own skills to know that you've built it once, you can build it again. It's just
Exactly.
going to look different and on your own terms. I want to talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about real estate at this point because I read something online on your Instagram and it said something about, I think it was one of the first blogs you put up about now having to deal with this the pandemic and the economic fallout that we're experiencing now.
Mm-hmm.
And that this was the first time that you had dealt with something like this. And I
Mm-hmm.
found myself looking at it and going, I lived through this in 2008. I
Right.
lost a whole bunch of properties in 2008
Mm. Sorry to
when
hear.
we hit the economic crash,
Mm-hmm.
and I could really personally feel your pain of what am I going to do and how am I going to make ends meet and how
For
am I going to
sure.
salvage what I've built. So talk to me a little bit about that. And I love that
Yeah.
you sharing the process and the experience and in a very vulnerable and transparent way because it gives everyone the permission to be there with you.
Mm,
You know what I
mm.
mean?
No, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that that's coming across because that's one thing that I decided I was always gonna do is like I was always just gonna be vulnerable about it because I find that the things that are most uncomfortable to be vulnerable about is usually where there's most learnings
Mm-hmm.
there that other people can have. So yeah, correct. I shared a blog post where I honestly kind of dissected where I felt I stood in a time like this, and yeah, the interesting thing is when the market is frothy and everything is growing, it's really hard to tell where your mistakes are
Yeah.
because there's a lot of growth to cover up your mistakes. And then when the low tide comes, you can see all the things dried up on the shore, so to speak. So in the same way, low tide comes in, and extra money goes away. And I in 2019, I mean, there was just a lot of money everywhere, not even just in the lending markets, but also for me, like working in media and stuff like that, speaking, like I was making a lot of cash in a lot of different ways. And so the income actually also blinds you to, your investing skill because, my investments, if they weren't generating money, I'd say, no problem. I'll just throw money at it and
Right.
just throw money everywhere because I got money coming everywhere. And then once the cash just stops completely,
Oh, I got to cover all this now.
yeah, and then you're just like, whoa, okay. But all in all, I did well, and I'm thankful that the timing didn't jam me up because I'm very, very hyper aware that if I would have been caught in the middle of my renovations when this pandemic hit, I don't know. I don't know if I would have made it out, and I can say that with honesty. So I'm just like, whew, just realizing that okay, back to the basics. Make sure you buy things that cash flow. Make sure if you're gonna buy something that is intensive to fix, that you get the financing for it, or you negotiate a good deal and so forth. So those are probably some of the biggest lessons I learned over the last few years. But I'm grateful that I went through the bumps and bruises, honestly, because I'm just emerging out of that as well a lot stronger now too, because I feel like I know this. I know now what to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know before. I
Yeah,
know
real
now.
estate is one of those things that you can read all the books you want and you can attend all the seminars you want. You can watch other people do it. But until you have the property, until you are responsible, until you have to deal with the banks and you have to negotiate, until you have to deal with the contractors and the tenants and the repairs and the middle of the night calls, you don't know what you're doing until you actually have lived through that. And then you can be doing everything right and it's shit still hits the fan.
I remember, I'm quite a spiritual guy, and I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I remember when I had my first property under contract, it's a 10-unit building, how bad I wanted it. And I remember I was meditating one time or praying or something like that. And I said, God, what I prayed for, I said, please give me all the problems that come with having this thing. Like, I'm
What is
ready
wrong
for
with
it.
you?
Yeah. And trust me, it made good on that promise. I got all the problems and then some that I wanted, but like that always jumped out at me and always stayed with me, because for me, you're not ready to manifest a thing until you're ready for the problems that it comes with.
Mm-hmm.
Every blessing that you're pursuing comes with its equal and reciprocal amount of pressures and responsibilities. And you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, God, give me all these properties, and then you expect you're going to coast through it. Like they're going to come with its own weight.
Mm.
And so I just remember praying for the weight. Give me the weight. Give me the problems. I want them.
Right.
And at some point I was like, all right, please, I learned my lesson, but
It's enough. I got it.
it's enough. It's enough.
I'm going to give you a quick story, and I don't think I've ever shared this on any platform. So when I was working in Austin, Texas, it was 2003, 4, 5, something like that. I was making probably about $31,000 a year at my job.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the part about where you eat shit because your vision is supposed to be bigger than what you're trying to do.
Right,
I was working and that part. And I saw the opportunity. It was the market was, the lenders were giving out money in the market. This is the time you do it. I was like, how, and I looked at the numbers. I'm like, how am I going to support a property on $30,000? But then I was like, listen, if you can juggle $100, you can juggle $10,000. It is what it is. So I bought a duplex, and the plan was for me to live in one and rent the other side, which would offset my rent. I would break even. That's okay, because it's all about the investment.
Right. I
had not closed. I maybe it'd been a week. The tenant on this side, on the left side, called and said that the tenant on the right side has 2 very violent pit bulls who they had hidden from me. And the pit bull had grabbed the neck of the tiny dog that they had through the fence and killed it in the yard.
Oh my God.
And the tenant on the left had a little baby, like around probably even less than 1 year old. And I had to go deal with this in the middle of the night. Okay, that was the beginning. And then the beginning of the end, right? I mean, one thing led to another. And then there was the roof that collapsed. And then there was the water leak. And then there was the pipe burst. And then there was the tenant refusing to pay rent. And then there was the eviction. Yep. And then there was, after the eviction, then they completely destroyed the property. They broke the windows. They tagged the house. And then, I mean, I have no idea how I covered all of those expenses on my paycheck. But if there was anything that I learned from that one property, was how to manage all of these problems. And I am quite certain I did not pray for the promise.
And the interesting thing too is similarly, I bought this property. It was 10 units, and it was fully occupied. And then like to copy your thing, so it's like, and then I bought it in the summertime. Then winter came around, and it was freezing in there, and tenant started just picking up and just calling the city inspector, and then he goes, and and then that led to getting the building condemned because he was like, yo, you got to fix all these things. And then the pipes started bursting because it turns out that the windows were not the proper size, and so there was a cold draft. So we thought it was the heat, and then we spent a lot of money fixing the heat, and then we realized it was the windows, and it just kind of kept happening. Then someone broke in and vandalized everything and cut the service wire, so then we had to do a new electric, and so all these things. And now fast forward, and I thankfully done with the project, just even recently, honestly, done with the project, but I carry that project far longer than I thought I could ever. And when I sat down with my accountant, he told me how much I spent on that project. And he was like, yeah, he showed me a figure. It was like 350 grand. And I was like, yeah, what's this? He's like, well, this is how much you have in here. I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, including the equity? He's like, no. This is how much came after that. And, that figure, if I would have bought the building, someone said, yeah, you would put 350 in, I'd be like, yeah, I can't afford that.
Right.
But
how am I going to cover that? That's just nonsense.
But there's something about hardship that kicks you in an animal gear that, I didn't need. Like, I hustled, and it was a combination of things were going well, but also I worked my ass off to just like, and it sucked because for 2 years, even though I had made the most cash I'd ever made, I was also the brokest I'd ever been, because all this cash is going away. And it's really frustrating to like make a lot of cash, but then back to zero, literally zero. Because I'm just like, I don't want to just like save enough and
John, that's why your middle name is Hustle.
Right.
Right.
So just to say though, that same experience where you were like, yo, how making 30K am I going to cover all this? And you did.
Right.
And you sometimes going through a hardship reveals to you what you're really made of and what you could really do. And then when things get better, you're like, I know what I could do. Plus now you're benefiting from the hardship that you took.
Right.
So a lot of lessons there.
Lots of lessons. Talk to me a little bit about the show. Talk to me about Hustle. What was the thing that you learned the most in being in that media space and doing that work?
Now I'm working with small entrepreneurs to help them navigate the world of building their own businesses.
Oh man, that was a really fun, super fun experience. Got to work with Alicia Keys, got to work with my boy Marcus Samuelson. Got to work with a lot of entrepreneurs and bring them on the big screen. Got myself on the big screen. Had a billboard in Times Square. We were on 250 buses in New York City, which is the city where I'm born and raised. So and we were in the subways. I remember one day I was having a bad day because I was running late for a bunch of shit, and I was in the trains and I was pissed off, and I walked into a train and I looked up and I saw my own billboard on the train, and I was like, bruh, if you ever complain about having a bad day, like, perspective, man, like, you gotta relax, like, So that was a ride of a lifetime, and I think, I learned about the power of television for sure, because I was the same guy before the show than after the show, but after the show, you like, it's almost like Super Mario Brothers, where when you hit the star, bum, 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 dun, 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 like nothing hits you. Like, everything hits you and nothing stops you. Nothing even phases you. You're invincible for that little while. And so, like, being on air felt the same thing to me. It was like I just had star power for, like, however long we were on air, plus the reruns or whatever. And it's just an electrifying experience. It's really awesome. I enjoyed it so much. And it was awesome. It was grueling. We worked we shot 12-hour days, 6 days a week for 3.5 months.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how people think that it's just such a glamorous. Again, just like everything else, you got to be willing to take the responsibility and the work that comes with the people. Think it's such a glamorous thing to do, and they see the billboards and the posters and the media attention and blah blah blah, and then they forget and don't realize what it goes into creating all of that. Let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about, were you surprised at the amount of work and the effort
Oh,
and
for
the
sure.
energy? Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I mean, I would our call time was 6 a.m. and we wouldn't wrap until, I don't know, 8 p.m. and sometimes 6 p.m. But then because I cared so much about the show and I developed a close relationship with the director, him and I love drinking Japanese whiskey. So he'd be like, "Yeah, let's go to the op." So then we would sip whiskey and then I would write, right? So I realized, so I learned a number of things. Um, I learned, so, you and I were on camera talent, so to speak, right? But in this show, I played a lot of roles. I also played the role of an executive producer in that I pulled a lot of strings and made a lot of things happen. There wasn't a single guest in the entire season one, with the exception of maybe two or three in the whole season, that weren't my connections. Like I called them and said, "Yo, let's do this."
Mm.
That's the role that Marcus Samuelson, our EP, played, opening doors as well. So like I played EP capacity. I know so much about this stage of business that the producers whom write the episodes, they know how to produce TV, but they don't know about business.
Right.
So a lot of the production was consulting me, and they were like, "Yo, John, how would you do this?" And so I found myself in a situation where not only was I on camera talent and I was an executive producer, also producing, and so I played a lot of different roles there, and you know, I appreciate the experience, because I I got the experience. I got the experience of literally conceiving a show, building out the sizzle reel, going to market, pitching it. Vice became interested. They bought the pilot. We shot the pilot. That agonizing wait that comes after it. Their period was up, and then they extended it, and they were like, "Look, it's likely not going to happen, but Cadillac is interested in potentially being the co-production sponsor." That was fucking Hail Mary. Fourth down, last quarter, last play. You tipped it. And then we caught it. Cadillac ends up buying it. So I get a call from Marcus Samuelson. We're going on air. Alicia's excited. Everyone's excited. We get picked up. We go right into production. It's freezing cold. And, we tried to shoot the show so that it was like evergreen. So I'm in there with like sweaters and light jackets, but it's biting New York, freezing cold. So that was very uncomfortable. But yeah, I went through the whole experience, shooting, long set days, and although it was agonizing, I fucking loved it. I loved it. And just we're rolling, and the thing about the way that the show is we don't shoot on set.
Right.
It's a rolling show. So
Right.
we're caravan, we have 3 or 4 vans fucking rolling every time, and I'm in the front van with like the executive producers, and I'm just like sitting there, and I'm just going over what we're doing next, and we have to shoot a bunch of episodes all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the producers would say, okay, so I'm helping 3 or 4 businesses grow in parallel.
Right.
So I have to keep tabs on what we did with the businesses, where they were at, this and that.
Yeah, this is producing a show on the fly, which takes it takes incredible amount of work and skill to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it was a 22-person crew. So and New York City is such a lively city. So just imagine pulling up on scene, at Washington Square Park, and we just fucking walk out, and there's 2 or 3 cameras. We got this big ass crew, and I'm working with these. It was just so awesome. I'm not gonna lie, it was the coolest thing.
It sounds
and
like
I learned
you
so
were
much from it.
bitten by the bug. I mean,
I was bitten by the bug. Man.
Yeah, this is
cool.
what it's like when you get the first adrenaline rush being in media, as you realize, holy crap, this is how it all comes about. Okay, I can do this. But there's nothing more gratifying than seeing a vision come to reality, and a product is created from a vision. And when you see that process and are in that process, you realize once you see how that happens, that correlates to everything in life, that correlates to everything in business, that correlates to everything else that's going on, because you understand that life is also a production and business is also a production. They're just a different set of variables and different pieces. That's it.
And I'll say this too, for as much as we talk about business and stuff, every time I've leveled up in my life, it has not been a result of anything new that I learned in business, it's been a result of um, becoming a better person.
Mm.
So it's really interesting because looking further and further into yourself and reassessing your own value frameworks and getting rid of some of the limiting behaviors and all that internal work that I've done and continue to do, sometimes when you hit a roadblock in your craft and your endeavor and your business, sometimes it's got nothing to do with the business. Sometimes it has everything to do with you. And, you know, it's just wild because you've done such a great job facilitating dialogue and just getting to reflect on various different parts of my journey, let's say, from TV. And it just starts to sound like this thing, like it's like a movie. You're just like, whoa, I can't believe all these things have even happened. And like, how did that even happen? Um, and like, I just got to believe that the source of it is, you know, like aligning yourself and it's putting out such a good energy that opportunity just begin to flow your way. Not even on some like kumbaya magic stuff, but just like when you meet someone whom like feels a way about you and you're just like, yeah, I want to do this with you. And that to me counts so much more than how smart you are, what school you went to. It's like, yeah, this person makes me feel good and I just want to work with them.
Right.
And customers come in that way, partners come in that way, investors come in that way, and projects unfold that way. And some work and some don't. But like, you go on all these kinds of crazy rides as a result of, being a person that, is magnetic. And yeah, so I guess for anyone listening, that's what I would focus on more. As much as it's important to learn the craft, I think it's more important to be a solid person.
Yeah. And, and I'm going to offer another deeper layer to that. I think one of the reasons that is that very fact is so incredibly apparent to you, and you see it in a very different way than most do, is because you've had that television experience. And the reason for that is because the camera doesn't lie. You can't be anyone other than who you are, and you can't be authentic any less than completely and absolutely authentic in order for a production or a piece of video or a piece of content to work. The camera doesn't lie. The energy of behind a microphone doesn't lie. And when you spend some time in front of a microphone or in front of a camera and you see yourself being, not doing, but being, then you realize where your authenticity is. And the more you do it, the more you live in your authentic space. And the more you live in your authentic space, you realize that's the point. The point is for us to be and to continue to level up to being who we are and more aligned with being who we are, because that is the thing that is unique, that is different, that is us. That is the thing that essentially, eventually does and will pay the bills. Anything else?
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. There is a sobering reality that comes with seeing play back,
Yeah.
and all your own insecurities about yourself come out. So like that is something that is specific, true to being in media, because you're in the business of seeing yourself played back, and you begin making adjustments, not in a tried way, but at least for me, I've been making adjustments on when I felt my delivery came out more passionate than I wanted, or when I had too much ego in this response, and so just having that constant feedback of how you're coming across to the world helps you, become a better person. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this so much. This has been really awesome. You're super good at this, by the way.
Thank you.
I could tell you are seasoned vets.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your wisdom. I really appreciate you spending time with us. It was supposed to be 30 minutes. We're way past our time. And
I didn't even look at the time.
Yeah, thank you for being so generous with your time, with your wisdom. And I love that you are the voice for a generation who is looking to do things differently, particularly, I can speak maybe today, particularly at a time in this country where we absolutely need conversations about ownership, conversations about equity, conversations about doing our own thing, conversations about entrepreneurship, and really taking our power back individually and for our communities. And I love that. So if there's anything I can do to support you, please let me know. For those of you watching and listening, you can find him on Instagram, or just type in his name in Google. You can find him, and he's very responsive, which I'm really impressed about.
Thank you.
And if you haven't seen any of his content, I suggest you do. And for more information, check out my website. I'll put a link to resources and make sure you can connect with him. And if you have any idea about any other guests who would like to join us and we'd like to have a conversation with them, drop us a line. Thank you very much. I'm Silva Harapetian. See you next time. Thanks, John.